Hi, my name is Apostate, or Apostate Aladdin. Have you ever had a conversation where you were expecting some kind of answer, but instead you were asked, what about so-and-so? If you participate in discussions about Islam, you probably have. That's whataboutism. According to the Oxford Languages Dictionary, whataboutism is the technique or practice of responding to an accusation or difficult question by making a counter-accusation or raising a different issue. It could be considered a version of the tu quoque logical fallacy. I'm not arguing that whataboutism is absolutely necessary in Islam. The title is just a joke. I was going to comment on how heavily utilized it is by Muslims, but first I do want to start with an example from the Quran that came to mind the moment I started brainstorming for this video. Surah Al-Ghashiyah. Al-Ghashiyah means the great overwhelming event. The author is clearly talking about the Day of Judgment. The short surah can be summarized into the following sections: some punishments from the Day of Judgment, some rewards from the Day of Judgment, making an argument for Islam's truthfulness, and returning to scaring people about hell. The switch from the second to third section is pretty abrupt, and it goes like this. And carpets spread out as a reward. Do they not see how the camels were created, and the sky how it was raised, and the mountains how they were erected, and the ground or earth how it was spread or flattened? I'd say section 2 and 3 probably flow better if they were switched, because they doesn't refer to the people just mentioned before it. But that's not an argument per se. As a reader, I get to have an opinion about the text. But the whataboutism here is, you're not convinced by the arguments I made for my religion? Okay, what about life's complexity? This is the watchmaker analogy, an analogy that attempts to prove the necessity for a designer for the world to exist. It has been debated a lot. Look it up if you'd like. But even if you find it logical, all you can conclude from it is that there probably is a creator, not a specific one, but just a creator. I don't care for this argument because I don't care to prove or disprove God's existence in general. I care to know whether it is demanding our worship or else it'll torture us. I care to know if it is actually the source of those religions. So here's why this is whataboutism. If the author just means to make a case for the idea of God in general, then that's fine, I suppose. It's not a great argument, but it is an argument. But Allah should be proving His existence in His specific description, not the concept itself. He doesn't specify which one He's going for here, but I think the second one would be more productive, especially that Muhammad was often preaching to polytheists and believers of the book. They can easily retort with, no, my God of choice is the creator, and they'd have just as strong of a case as the surah. In addition, the answers to those verses is, no, we have not seen the process of instantaneous creation of everything listed. We see through evidence that animals slowly evolved. We understand that the sky is not a solid object raised above the earth. We also understand the mechanisms behind how the geological features, like mountains, take millions of years to slowly emerge. If not longer than that, don't quote me, I'm not a geologist. So the surah is making a poor case for a creator and absolutely no case for Islam specifically. In my opinion, this is whataboutism because instead of fully addressing the validity of Islam, the author responds with a question about something else. In summary, the author says, if you don't believe in Islam, what about the plausibility of a creator? It sounds like bargaining when actually it's intended as a one-to-one response. Or at least that's what I think. Allah is not here to tell us what He intended and what He didn't intend. If Allah was a da'wah person and He spoke like this, He'd get slammed in any proper debate. That is not an argument to prove Islam in any way. Anyway, this video was intended to be about how Muslims often converse with ex-Muslims. It was inspired by someone tweeting at me something along the lines of, what about atheism? You support the Chinese Communist Party against the Uyghur Muslims. After facepalming so hard I almost got a Zabiba, I was inspired to make this video, so here we are. If you're ex-Muslim or even Muslim, you probably heard some of these before, so let's get to it. Number 1, you're an atheist. So what about China? This one's extremely popular these days. A lot of Muslims seem to believe that what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to the Uyghur Muslims is inspired by atheism somehow, and that all atheists support each other and share the same principles and moral code. I suspect they think that way because that's how they view themselves and other Muslims. They support each other, sometimes blindly, and they believe that they have a perfect moral guide that they all try to follow. That's not what atheism is. Atheism is simply the lack of belief in theism. Religious people make claims about God and existence, and atheists don't buy it. That's all there is to it. Atheists have different political opinions, ways of life, beliefs about the origin of life, ideas about morality, and so on. That may scare a believer if they don't like the idea that ex-Muslims or non-believers in general don't share a set of unified beliefs. But wait till they find out that the followers of other religions disagree with their unified beliefs, and even Muslims among themselves disagree. A very, very obvious example is the split among Muslims between supporting or condemning the Taliban. Thankfully, most are condemning. If Muslims themselves aren't unified, how do they expect atheists to be? We don't even share a holy book. Books by Hitchens, Dawkins, Darwin, or any other public enemy of Islam aren't sacred. I personally haven't read any of them. I know this is anecdotal, but the vocal ex-Muslims I spoke to often derive their morals from humanitarian and utilitarian ideas, or at least I do. To name a few, I care about the individual freedom to the extent that it doesn't harm other people. I care about the greater good for humanity and by extension the environment we live in. I care about minimizing people's suffering. I can never perfectly abide by my moral code, just like believers say humans never perfectly follow Islam. But I do my best. So in short, I absolutely condemn what the CCP is doing, even though I don't think Islam is the truth. I don't oppose people's right to practice their religion to the extent that doesn't harm others. The crimes against humanity China is committing obviously aren't for the greater good of humanity, and they definitely are not minimizing people's suffering. To contrast that with some things Muslim public figures get away with saying, here's Muhammad Hijab suggesting ex-Muslims be strategically relocated out of their home countries instead of executed.
Somebody who leaves Islam and explains to the public that they have left Islam and why they have left Islam. Is this person to be put to death under Islam?
Well, I've written a book on this. It's actually called... I'm not saying to you that the only ruling in Islam is that the person who's a public apostate is to be put to death. What I actually recommend in my book, which is ironic, I say that in this day and age, this is my position. I proposed that it would be within the maslahah, the common interest of the Muslim people, to make peace treaties with non-Muslim countries such that apostates in certain Muslim countries are not to be put to death and in fact are strategically located to other non-Muslim countries.
That's how low the bar is. When they're not defending our execution, the next best option is exile. That's not a hateful dog whistle, that's a train whistle. I get censored without even supporting such awful policies, yet they get away with doing so openly. But don't be Islamophobic though. Number 2. Oh, so you believe everything came from nothing? This one's also very popular. It's pretty similar to how Allah argues in Surah Al-Ghashiyah. If you don't believe Islam, what about creationism? Or what about the origin of life? Just because I'm not convinced by the arguments religion makes doesn't mean I think reality appeared instantaneously and everything came from non-existence. That's basically what Muslims believe, right? Except they fill this nothing gap with Allah. People who ask this presume that atheists by default believe in the Big Bang Theory as the ultimate answer, and I think they misunderstand the Big Bang Theory to begin with. They could also mean evolution, but I'll just address one thing today. The way I understand it, the Big Bang is the earliest point in time we can predict based on the data and scientific models. It doesn't dictate what led to that point, if anything at all. I could be mistaken about this definition, but that's part of my point here. I don't care about the Big Bang. I don't have a conclusion about how the world came to be. I just disagree with the claims made by religion. I don't need to have an answer to determine that another answer is incorrect or implausible, meaning unlikely. Let me give you an analogy. I leave my house and I find that my car is missing. I ask my neighbor if they know what happened and they say the car gained sentience, winked, and just drove away. Now, I've never seen a car do that except in fictional stories, and I have no reason to believe this happened without evidence for it. I don't know how the car disappeared, but it doesn't mean that I have to believe my neighbor just because I don't have an answer yet. Even if everyone says the neighbor is a very honest, trustworthy, nice person, Sadiq Amin, like the Prophet, I would keep looking for other witnesses, check cameras that might have caught what happened, call the police to ask if it was towed, and so on. And that is an urgent issue, so I'd keep investigating. The plausibility of a creator, on the other hand, is not an urgent issue. How existence came to be is a very interesting topic to think about. In fact, I've asked this question a lot as a child, but the topic is inconsequential to my disbelief and my life. It doesn't change how I live my life. I've already concluded God cannot be the vindictive, needy, man-made version, so I kind of don't care. To further expand on this analogy, say I found pieces of glass where the car used to be. They're the same shade as my car's glass and they weren't there before. That's a clue that a thief broke in and stole it. It's more justified to have that conclusion for the time being than believing that a car drove away on its own or that an unseen entity made that happen. That is analogous to the evidence scientists use to come up with a hypothesis and test it to make it a theory. Even then, the theory is forever challenged and sometimes disputed. So in short, I don't know how the world came to be. I never said everything came from nothing. I just said the prophet marrying a child is a bad thing, for example. And then I get this question thrown at me. Number 3, what about the death penalty in the West? This is often said in response to objections about the apostasy penalty. The punishment for apostasy or blasphemy in Islam is execution. There is no doubt about it, and knowledgeable Muslims agree. They just come up with excuses if they're apologists, and some of them are despicable people who are proud of it. So rather than addressing how this rule will be unfair if applied the other way around, they make it seem like you support the death penalty for heinous crimes. There's so much wrong with that comparison. It implies that you do support the death penalty at all, which you might not. And if you say you don't support the death penalty, they'll accuse you of wanting murderers and rapists to live a happy, comfortable life in prison. There's no escaping this cycle of distracting debates, like about the ethics of execution and the prison system and so on. This isn't the topic at all. The question implies that a person leaving Islam and not hiding it is comparable to, say, a serial killer, because an ex-Muslim who isn't hiding their disbelief spreads their corruption. It is very hard to view a person the same way after they say something so obtuse. How would you feel about being compared to the worst criminals because you don't find a religion convincing? Which you probably don't find other religions convincing already, so you're in the same boat with us. And don't forget, in Islam, you could be a rapist, and as long as you're a Muslim, you have a better shot at escaping hell than a disbeliever who lived a peaceful life. Similarly, they'll bring up the death penalty for treason and ask you why you're not protesting that instead. Even if you object to it, nobody has the time to protest every injustice in the world, and we don't need to do that before we're allowed to object to the things that harm us. Besides, apostasy isn't treason, unless you think that Islam has secrets that ex-Muslims are exposing to outsiders, or that vocal ex-Muslims are secret agents plotting a conspiracy against this undefined ummah. The same ummah that is collectively a group of all Muslims, but they don't like to be lumped as one group when some of them behave poorly. I'm so confused. Number 4, what about the West? This question takes many forms, and I simply can't list them all. I think it stems from the need for believers to have a shared identity that they defend ferociously. They think that ex-Muslims replace Islam with the West, especially when many ex-Muslims do see the West as a safe haven compared to their home countries at least, or compared to Muslim countries in general. But unfortunately, we're not always safe in the West, as we've seen time and time again. So we get asked about crimes committed by one Western country or another, as if we have to support that. They forget that their own countries and their own religious figures have done horrible things they may not support. They don't understand how difficult it is for ex-Muslims to pull away from their previous identities because of how Islam and Muslims treat them. They simply can't empathize or understand. On top of that, many of us don't feel like we belong in the West either. And so many Muslims are happy to see us struggle like that, even rubbing it in our faces. I oppose injustice regardless of who caused it. Whether it's a Muslim, an atheist, or a Western country, I don't care. I'm not scared of being sent to hell for opposing a crime against humanity. But believers are coerced into accepting so many horrible things as a necessary evil, like sex slavery. They may even spin it into a good thing. So I think questions like these stem from projection, because believers have to belong to something and they're forced to defend it no matter what. So they think ex-Muslims do the same thing. But I'm no psychologist, so don't quote me on that. The point is, what about the West? Whatever that means. Simple. Nobody's above criticism, and 2 wrongs don't make a right. Number 5. What about what kuffar did to Muslims? 2 wrongs don't make a right. Whoa, deja vu. When I call out the author of the Quran for his generalization of kuffar, I get told that the kuffar, disbelievers, historically harmed Muslims, so it's a fair generalization. Aside from the fact that this is according to stories kept by Muslims, don't forget that Muslims historically have harmed non-Muslims as well. All these groups fight each other. So by that logic, does it go both ways? Can we generalize Muslims based on what their people did historically? The Quran describes a type of kafir that doesn't really exist. A kafir that knows Islam is the truth but wants to go to hell anyway because they're bad, arrogant people or something. We're told that these kuffar did exist back in the day. I can assure you they're just characters for the plot, but even if they did exist, why is God so bad at using words? The way Allah talks about kuffar makes me realize that He has no idea about the kind of contentions we have with the so-called evidence for His religion. So how could that be God? I cannot believe in a God that is so oblivious to how His creation thinks. It's almost like He's got His own mental barriers and cognitive dissonance and blind faith, kind of like a human. Oh my God, it's all starting to make sense. Anyway, I should not be demonized based on the actions of characters in a story. A specific group in a desert fighting with Muslims doesn't excuse the imprecise, hateful, generalized language in the Quran, nor does it justify the death penalty for apostasy and so on. Number 6. What about the Holocaust? Oh boy. You'd be surprised how often I hear this. It is used when we object to how Muslim countries, Muslim communities, and vigilante groups publicly treat apostates. We don't like being demonized simply because we don't believe in Islam. But Muslims openly mock, belittle, ridicule, discriminate against, and harm ex-Muslims. Their videos on public platforms rarely get censored, and their communities never ostracize them. It's just normal. We point out that non-Muslims can be too scared of the controversy or backlash to call them out. They could get slandered and labeled as an Islamophobe, which is synonymous for bigot, which shouldn't be that way, or even get cancelled by well-meaning yet awfully ignorant Westerners. And in response, some Muslims say, so, what about the Holocaust? I dare you to come out and say the Holocaust was fake. You're too scared to offend your Western Jewish overlords, and you know you'll get in legal trouble. I'm tempted to just sigh my way through the whole video, to be honest. I don't fear offending anyone, except I have to keep in mind the very real danger that comes with inadvertently offending a particular group of people, and it's not the Jews, trust me. Let me demonstrate by offending some followers of Judaism. Your God isn't real. The idea that you're the chosen people is nonsensical, especially when you factor in how God stood by and watched the atrocities committed against Jews in the 20th century alone. I don't know how you still believe in Him after that. Also, the idea of a promised Holy Land is stupid. I'm not commenting on political conflict today, illegal settlements, and claim of land ownership because I don't talk about things I'm not well informed on. But if you're the type to claim land solely based on a fictional promise, that's a dangerous mentality, and it's one reason why I think religion has so much potential for harm. See? Easy. I don't care if they stop paying me. No, watch people actually believe that. The reason why I don't deny the Holocaust is because I have no reason to deny the Holocaust. We've seen the evidence. There are photos and videos, not just a religious story from a millennium ago. Usually people who deny it are conspiracy theorists and or anti-Semites. So your anti-Semitism is showing. The rationale behind this whataboutism, if you can even call it rationale, is that the followers of Judaism run the world and are plotting against Islam, or that I'm afraid to offend a certain group of my audience. Regardless of your background, if you're watching, I appreciate you giving my videos a chance, but I'm not worried about offending you. I say what I believe in, and I hope that steers me away from bad opinions, but just because you're offended doesn't mean that you're right. Number 7, what about King Richard II, I think? Most Muslims, at least most Sunnis, believe that Muhammad married Aisha at age 6 and consummated at age 9. You can't see it, but I barfed in my mask a little bit. Don't worry, I got spares. This is according to Aisha's own narration, and she's part of the foundation of Hadith in Islam. I can, and I will, dedicate a whole video to this topic. It's absurd that I even have to. Today, it's simply about one of the many, many poor rebuttals. When I object to this awful act, they'd ask, what about this country or that state where they allow people to get married as young as 16 or something? Simply put, either those laws are outdated and should be reformed, or they mean a 16-year-old marrying someone in their age range, which isn't great either, and that's a whole nother topic. But Muhammad's bride was almost a third of that age. So whatever the case, these laws are bad. They were never posed as the best of humanity like the Prophet. So, next question. Well, what about King Richard II? Didn't he marry a 6-year-old? Oh wow, you got me there. I gotta be honest with you. Yeah, screw him. He shouldn't have done that. It's that simple. I'm a monarchy phobe and proud. What they're trying to do is accuse you of the fallacy of presentism. And when they use that word, the audience tends to think they know what they're talking about. This is the hottest word in the dawah scene these days. In simple terms, you shouldn't judge the past only with a modern point of view. Generally, that is true. You need to keep in mind historical context. For example, if during a certain time in a certain area, most girls were married young, mind you, not 6 years old, does that mean that all the men who participated were evil? No. They're influenced by their upbringing. Does that mean that it was the ideal outcome for the girls, on average at least? No. These two things can be simultaneously true. But in terms of context, Muhammad wasn't some primitive, ignorant man easily influenced by harmful practices around him, right? Oh my God, it's all starting to make sense. Sorry, I forgot about sex slavery. He had the guidance of the creator of the universe. He was delivering that guidance to us. So everything that happened in Muhammad's life was part of Allah's master plan to reveal his perfect religion after so many iterations. Was that really the best way the story could unfold? Aside from it being extremely suspicious, Muhammad is an idol, not the kind you smash, like he's a role model. Muslims are commanded to follow the Sunnah, to follow in his footsteps. So every single child marriage that took place since then, if allowed under Islamic rules, is Muhammad's fault. Don't say a 6-year-old is not a child. Save that for my upcoming video about the topic. Upcoming as in at some point. This disgusting whataboutism is used by too many Muslim apologists and preachers, so I'm not surprised when I hear everyday moderate Muslims repeating it. It's not because they're bad people, or that they would have supported this otherwise, it's just they're forced to. Off the top of my head, Yasir Qadi, Farid Responds, Full Metal Theist, Muhammad Hijab, Ali Dawah, and on TikTok, Adil Adban, Riyadh Muslim, Mo Peshi. Those are just a few examples of apologists online who Muslims trust and see as non-extremists. Some aren't exactly scholars, but they have a huge influence in the dawah scene, preaching to young Muslims. I get told every other day, brother, you should ask one of those people, they explain it very well. And I try not to get offended because they're implying that I hadn't thought these excuses through, but regardless, the point is, I don't care who else married a child. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Yes, I know it's the 3rd time I said that because it's a summary of the whole video. 2 wrongs don't make a right. But you had to watch the whole thing, so joke's on you. I could keep going. In fact, I could even make this a series or make each one of those questions the topic of a live stream, but I'm tired of it, to be honest. You know how they say there are no stupid questions? That only applies if the person asking is sincere and is willing to listen to the answer rather than throw the next one at you. So whether you're a Muslim or not, be careful not to fall for this yourself. If you're faced with an idea you disagree with and you immediately use whataboutism, you don't get a chance to examine the idea. You dismissed it and now you're waiting to give a rebuttal to the rebuttal to your rebuttal and you forgot the point already. The reason I jokingly say whataboutism is the 6th pillar of Islam is because it essentially helps maintain the structural integrity of a believer's faith. Like a pillar holds up a building. It's almost a necessity in the 21st century because it is very difficult to give direct and clear answers that don't sound absurd by modern standards. Whataboutism comes up so often in discussions about Islam, and I'm surprised to hear it from certain people. I still acknowledge that I have a lot to learn in life, and I don't think I'm special. But the more I listen to the popular Muslim apologists today, and even scholars, especially the very educated ones, the less intimidating they seem. I'm sure someone like Yasir Qadi can talk circles around me when it comes to most topics in Islam. He literally gets paid to study it. It's his livelihood and maybe even his passion. He'll probably throw in a few big words, a few academic topics, and tell you the specifics require a lot of studying and research and are reserved for those with more knowledge than yourself. And that used to give people like him credibility and authority over these conversations. But the moment he uses whataboutism or some poor excuse about the Prophet's marriage, he's no longer a revered scholar to me. He's just another man. A man who can't seem to address the point head on, whether because he's dishonest or because that's what indoctrination did to his rationality, I don't know. And I can easily pick apart his words if I want to. And this isn't about him specifically. I mean, most preachers and apologists, if not all. I am against gatekeeping discussions about Islam. They're not just for academic scholars and theists and atheists with PhDs. Just like everyday people are expected to believe in Islam, they should be allowed to understand it as well. And they should be allowed to think and even disagree with what the knowledgeable preachers say. Because at the end of the day, I'm not bringing forward false information from sources that the scholars disagree with. So their abundance of knowledge is irrelevant unless they come up with apologetic points based on information I don't know, information that isn't canonically or widely accepted. They often rely on cheap tactics like whataboutism, maybe not intentionally, but they do. Maybe because they know their responses aren't convincing. Why would they use an excuse like, look, other people did it too, if they weren't desperate? Why else would they give you a dozen half-baked reasons why Muhammad's marriage was okay? Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 stupidest reasons why a 6-year-old is actually a mature woman. And this is part of why I have more conversations with everyday Muslims than I do with preachers and apologists, though I have those as well. Check my videos. But we already heard their opinions in lectures. It's time to bring these conversations to the masses. And it's time to hold Islam accountable without distractions. I hope this video taught you enough to be able to spot whataboutism. Whether you're going about your day-to-day life, listening to a preacher, or even reading the Quran, I have not sifted through the Quran to see if there are more examples of whataboutism. This just came to mind. So let that be your homework, I suppose. And the next time you're thinking about these topics, think critically. Think for yourself. Yes, nailed it. No bloopers. Sorry.